It's getting chilly in Germany. If you know me, you know chili is that that's not my favorite. But I'm with my kids and grandkids and wife, and plus I got this very cool uh, quarter zip pullover on sale, a slamming sale. So and I'm warm inside. Okay, go on, Steve. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. Okay, so that's pretty much that's what we call the Old Testament, and what the Jews of century 1 called the Bible. Verse 2, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he also made the universe. All right, basically 2 sentences that are, they are just slamming full of important stuff. First of all, in verse 1, it's a simple and I think reliable assumption that, remember, the audience here are Jews, Christian Jews, who had been dispersed because of the persecution of Christians in Jerusalem. And they had gone pretty much to the extent of the known world at that time, which is basically a very small portion of the actual globe, but still. And probably most scholars that I've been able to turn over and pick up, they think that these Christians were in that, the western crescent of the Mediterranean. So it's 2 Christians, but a great assumption is they didn't have any problems believing that, again, what we call the Old Testament, what they would have called the Bible, was inspired by God. It was his word. And now the writer says, in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son. One of the themes of the whole entire book of Hebrews is that Jesus is more than, better than. And so you've got Jews who had such reverence for the prophets and those, basically what I would consider the faithful Old Testament characters and personages. They had such high regard for them, and they had good reason. But here, it's a little bit like saying, and that was good, that Old Testament thing, that the prophets, okay, and what they said to and for our ancestors, that was good. But something better has happened now. In these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. I don't think we get the impact of that. I'm not sure. I don't know how we could. I've not known a time when we didn't have the Bible. But you got to realize, in AD 68, the closest thing to a New Testament that these people had would have been copies of, hand-copied copies of letters from the apostles, primarily James, Peter, Paul, and the gospel writers, Jude as well, John, but they would have been hand copied, and it's even true that often in a certain, like in a region, a portion of the copy would have gone to one church, another portion would have gone to another church, until the copies were in portions out there to a bunch of churches. And then what they would do is they would rotate. This got that fragment, this got that fragment, and so forth all the way around, so that over time the churches would have had in their possession the fullness, the entirety of those letters and documents, but only as copies. So to have the Word, the Bible, it's so taken for granted today, and I'm guilty. But for the audience of the book of Hebrews, the author he wasn't the author because God was the author, but the writer starts out with the reliability of what they had as the Bible, what we call the Old Testament. And then he says, and now in these last days, he has spoken through his Son, which my implication is, and this is way better. Then he talks about the Son, whom he, God, appointed heir of all things. Okay. Well, I mean, there's not a complicated legal arrangement, but it has to do with a legal arrangement even in our day. A designated heir was to inherit whatever had been designated, and in this case, he was appointed heir of everything. That's big. And if he was appointed heir of everything, God spoke through him who was appointed heir of everything. And we're loading up a kind of a credential here. And through whom he also made the universe. So it's like, well, the prophets. God was good to give us the prophets and speak through them in various ways at various times. But now, in these last days, these days that the writer and his audience were living in, he said, he spoke to us through his Son, who was the designated heir, the appointed heir of everything. And oh, by the way, through him, God made the universe. Okay, are you getting the sense of he's layering layers of authority and power onto the Son, Jesus? Verse 3, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. It seems like that's, what? Okay. If his Son is the radiance of God's glory, you don't have to have very much background to have a sense that the glory of God is huge. And I get a little bit, okay, I'm a cynic and I admit it, but I get kind of, I don't know, when I hear, I mean, we have worship songs, oh God, we just want to see you, come show us. In both the Old and the New Testament, when people saw God, Daniel saw God and he was sick for like a week. Anybody who encountered God in that way was overwhelmed and not necessarily joyfully. The glory of God is immense. And Jesus is the radiance of that. Okay, here's how I view that. Jesus is a reflection of the glory of God. I'm so grateful to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and to the Holy Spirit who inspired them to write biographies from 4 different perspectives of the life of Jesus while he was on earth, in his humanity and his divinity. But this radiance of God's glory, it's a reflection. Jesus is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. Okay. A couple of quick things here. First of all, if I want to know God, then the way to do that is through his Son, Jesus. Because he's the radiance, he's the reflection. And then he goes on to say the exact representation of his being. In other words, Jesus, if you want to know God, you've got to know Jesus. He is the exact representation of God's being, his nature, his essence. And I mean, that's huge. It's easy to, skip past it, but you can't. And then he goes on, sustaining all things by his powerful word. You want to know why the world holds together? I'm not a physicist. I can't math my way out of a wet paper sack. So I'm not talking. I'm just on the surface here, okay? But what I know of the atomic structure of things is you've got electrons and protons and neutrons, and every atom is spinning at an incredible rate of speed. What keeps them from colliding? Well, when they do collide, what you get is a nuclear bomb, nuclear explosion. What keeps that from happening? Well, if I get it right, his powerful word. It's Jesus who sustains this world physically, and I think spiritually, through the powerful word. All right, his word is that powerful. And what we have in these days, we have God speaking through his Son. And his credentials and his affidavit and his file are thick. And there's every reason for us to trust that his word, what he said, how he spoke, was God speaking to us. Everything from just that, well, look at it. How did he say it? He's spoken to us, whom he appointed heir of all things, okay? Through whom he also made the universe, and who is the radiance of God, the exact representation of his being, and who sustains everything through his powerful word. I don't think you need anything more to believe and be confident that God spoke through this one, his Son. pick it up there next time on So Care with Stevie Boy. And as you know, we're not going to be going fast. Sorry. See you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.